Thanks for the kind introductions. Well, greeting from the sunny Arizona, Phoenix area. And we have had 26 consecutive days of temperature over 110 degrees. Yes, we're still making the records here. But like they said, but it's dry heat. Right. So today I'm going to be talking about the emergency vehicle preemptions in the Phoenix area. That's based on my agency's study and work over the past few years. Next slide, please. Well, this is the outline. I would like to have a word on what MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments, stand for and what's our relevance to this work. What is EVP? We'll dive into the basic definition of it, and we'll talk about why we need it. And I know we're also going to be looking into some reported benefits, which is important to the deploying agency. We'll take a look at the history because this technology has, well, the concept or the technology has existed for a long time. So we'll take a look at the history and see how it evolved. And then we will dive into the primary technology available to us this day. Finally, we have to look into the operations aspect to it because it's misleading to just call it a piece of technology. This is really a piece of technology to support the critical public safety traffic operation during the incidents. And then finally, I would like to share all the regional perspectives of deploying the EVP. And at the very end, I will share the two very useful resources. Those are the study that my agency has done back in 2016 and 18. And I have it in the downloadable link in the slide that you could download for your reference. Next slide, please. Well, what is MAG? MAG is an MPO. MPO stands for the Metropolitan Planning Organizations. And as you might know, it's federally mandated. Any region over 50,000 populations get to form the MPO. And the primary role of the MPO is to funnel all the federal funding coming to these regions. And we did that through collaboration with all our local agencies and the state and the counties as well, collaboratively develop plans and decide how we spend these federal dollars. In the greater Phoenix area, that's what MAG encompasses. We have about 27 cities and 3 native nations, and it's a pretty large area, and it's very progressive. It has been among the top, the fastest growing in populations in the nations for the last decade or two, and it's still expanding. Next slide, please. Okay, and why MAG presenting this subject? And I really need to give the credit to all my member agencies because I'm reporting on collaborative, the good work that they all done to make this possible. The couple of things that prompted us to look into the EVP was sometime in 2016 that we've seen there are quite some projects that we funded. They are used to deploy this EVP system in different cities. And then realizing that there are many jurisdictions in our region, and the question becomes, so how do we go about these things? Has there been any regional exchange of information, coordination, and what needs to be coordinated? We really know not much about it. So that's what prompted for the 2016 study is the best practices. We go around the region and find out what everybody's doing, what technology and what procedures involved. And so it was a very well-documented study. 2016, 2 years later, we had a follow-up based on the original recommendations, and we recommended to form a regional working group for the EVP, and I will explain that in the later slide. And very quickly, we established the regional, no, not yet, thank you, Kevin. We established the regional EVP working group, and to give you an idea, the EVP system is traffic signal system, but our tenant, the users, are team community, right? So this working group is unique in itself. It has the traffic engineers, it has the response community, and they could include primarily fire, but also in some cases police or ambulance are involved. And finally, more recently during COVID, we have deployed a EVP emerging technology pilot because there's a lot of changes in the basic technology and there are new offers available commercially. So we ended up did a pilot and get a good taste of it and learn a lot from that pilot. And I will share that in the later slide. Next slide, please. So what is emergency vehicle preemptions? It's actually a pretty well-known acronym in the fire community. So the basic idea is we need to provide a safe passage for this emergency vehicle at the signalized intersections. And by using some technology, we want to be able to do things like shutting off all the conflicting flow of traffic and that allow the approaching emergency vehicle to pass safely and reduce the delay and whatnot. And noted that I highlight the signalized intersection because it's a piece of technology that's part of the traffic signal system, and therefore it would not apply to where you have like the stop control intersections. Well, another major motive for people to consider the EVP has been in the past few decades, especially endorsed by the fire community, is a proven way to reduce the response time. Think of when without the EVP, the kind of confusion involved at the intersections of fire engine, would have to slow down and horn and then the driver would not usually took a while to figure out, what's going on, but the signal is still operating normally, right? And there are pedestrians involved as well. There's a lot of confusions. So each intersection with cautions, it takes a long time to actually pass it. And as luck would have it, crashes would happen. So now looking at some of the statistics, this is just 2021 from the National Safety Council, 56% of death in that particular year are the other vehicle collided with fire engine. Bad idea, huh? And then next category will be the light blue, 15%. Those are the driver of the emergency vehicle, as well as the darker blue slice, which is occupant. Well, it's safer if you're occupant in the emergency vehicle. But then to our astonishment, that this yellow pie, that the pedestrian account for a large share of death. And we're talking about death here, not including those injury. I'm looking at the crash type, multiple vehicle crash being the predominant, and that's meaning you run into an emergency vehicle in most cases. And this is a very gruesome picture showing on the screen here that it tipped over this fire engine, and I don't know how that minivan driver would survive. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some benefits. These are quoted study from the US DOT ITS Joint Program Office. starting from the top and then back for some, and I apologize for the word chart, but I just explained that. So this particular study in Houston found that, even though you use this EVP to interrupt traffic, right? There wasn't any detrimental effect on the intersection operation. So that's a good news for traffic engineer. The lower left is a report on the GPS-based emergency preemption system that actually save the travel time, the response time, by 5 to 7 minutes on a busy corridor. Lower right is this is a study done a very early day in this, that when the technology was first debuted. It's in St. Paul and Minneapolis, where the 3M, the company who invented it, the EVP technology, and 71% of reduction in the crash. This is based on an 8-year study and started in 1969. And I got this link in the very bottom of the slide, so you could take a look. There are more examples in the benefit database. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at the EVP technology. And so the 3 bars representing the 3 major offers are still available today. If you are, instrumenting a new intersections and whatnot. The optical base is simply put a oversized TV remote, a powerful remote emitting the infrared light, and that's a triggering mechanism to request the preemption service at the signal for the approaching vehicle. Then came late 1990 when the US DoD GPS become operational. You start seeing a lot of civilian applications. This is one of those area benefit from it. Trigger mechanism, you use, not the light, but use a radio, short range radio communicating to the field. And then you have a GPS, so you could actually communicate the location of vehicle. So that's some improvement. However, both options are called the hardware base, meaning think of the city that you have to cover, all the intersection need to be instrumented, and all the vehicle fleet has to instrument it with the emitter. Then finally, the last few years, there's a cloud-based system, and we'll dwell into that later. But that's all thanks to the wireless network out there. 2010, the LTE become prevalent, and 5G, first 5G was deployed 2019, but it's now everywhere. And so based on the cell phone-based system, and I think there are new options available without deploying these hardware at the intersections or in the vehicle. Next slide, please. So the basic concept, like I said, is the oversized TV remote per se when it started. So something mounted on the rooftop of an emergency vehicle. And on the receiving end, the intersection must have some kind of, this is an optical detector just to receive the infrared light and will decode that information and then send a signal to the electronics that reside in the traffic signal controller cabinets. And that's how the request was made to preempt the intersections. Now, next slide, please. Hardware base. The optical still exists, and actually things got better. The old day, there's only one company that invented it, and there was competitors, and then competitor was sued, and then, well, a couple years back, I mean, the IP, the intellectual property expires, and now these generic products are everywhere. It's very affordable. And if you drive around town and stop at the intersection, look for that little bird-like things that circle in the red. It does not need to be on top of the signal head, though. Many of those are on the mask arm that's aiming at you at your approach, and that's where it will receive this infrared light. So there's some non-issue with it. It's an infrared light, and so it requires line of sight, of course. And then you would have questions like, what about I have a curvature, roadways, approaching and intersections? Well, then you have to do a relay and whatnot. So another non-limitation is that, we wanted that request be received and attend for a certain distance as the emergency vehicle approaches the intersection. But how do we do the distance with the light, right? So it's measuring the light intensity, but see, light intensity is not a good measure. It's affected by the atmospheric conditions, and some say that a large signboard on the roadside, sometimes it could reflect the signals and amplify the intensity. But roughly, we want to usually do like 2,500 feet or so, accounting for the approaching speed of a fire engine, so that there's enough time for the signal to provide that preemption service. Now, the bottom of the chart is the GPS radio. It's the same concept. You still see instrumentation at the intersection, but there's only one radio for all approaches, as opposed to many for the optical. You need one for every approach, right? And then the radio is just a no-brainer. It's a short-range radio that you just communicate your GPS location to this radio at the intersection. With this mechanism and better measurement of distance, and distance translated into ETA, right? And that ETA is really needed because you can just change light at the intersection because someone might be still in the crosswalk, maybe still making the turn and all that. There's need time to terminate those conflicting flows before we could give the green to the approaching vehicle. Now, next slide, please. Now, cloud-based GPS. So what does cloud mean? Well, I think we all know these days, if you have a smartphone, using some apps, chances are your location is offered up. Someone is tracking you, right? Some app might even know where you check into a store and mapping you to a database and whatnot. So the basic concept is pretty straightforward. Looking on the left-hand side, that is, say, the optical or radio system. The characteristic, you need instrumentation on vehicle at the intersections. And remember that the more thing you add to the field, the more maintenance requirements there are, and there's replacement and all other things. And some replacement will need to disrupt the traffic. Now, entering cloud-based, how do we do that? Well, these fire engine these days, in the modern 911 dispatch system, every assets are tracked. So GPS is already on board. Something we call the AVL, Automatic Vehicle Location Unit, and that is tracking your location every single seconds. So having that information, and then we would tap into, say, the 911 dispatch, where an incident was initiated or created, and then and a particular dispatch, a vehicle was dispatched, or officer was sent, and all that jazz. That dispatch data, another source. So that source will pair it up with the particular vehicle, their location informations. Think about all the like a little dots in the map. Pair it with a map that has all the signalized intersections of the regions. And now you could see the moving dot approaching a intersection, and not all moving dots, but those that got dispatched to incidents. Now with this crucial information, that in theory, that you could say, well, this vehicle is approaching that intersection. It's about 2,500 feet, right? Our intended distance. Well, let's preempt that intersection. How do you preempt intersections? Well, good thing that nowadays a lot of the traffic signals are centrally monitored, meaning there's a center that could control it, and these requests and could just be sent over a network through to the field. So now you can see that there is an alternative to the hardware base. But think about a few things, and those, you have to answer when you consider that in your jurisdiction, that is a cell base based largely on your self coverage, and fire, you don't know where you gotta go. It's not always the most populous area, right? You want to make sure that you've got this decent, sufficient cell coverage. And other thing is the signal being able to control from the sender. Still not 100% in the US. There are some agencies that still does not have such capability, meaning signal just running independently. Those will not be eligible for these options. But as we improve our traffic signal system, as we improve our cell coverage, I mean, this is becoming more and more appealing options.
Hey, Jeff, we need to move it along so you can
Sure.
speed it up a
I'll
little
wrap
bit.
it up. Next slide, please. Well, regional perspective, if deploy these things in all my jurisdictions, that's one thing. But keep in mind that 911 are subject to auto aid, meaning vehicle venture out of your home jurisdiction. So the deployment of these things need to be coordinated, because at the end of the day, when it comes to the actual response to an incident, it's the right-hand side, the space is contiguous. It's not limited by the jurisdiction boundary. Next slide, please. Now, very quickly, I'll wrap it up in 2 minutes. What do we mean? Well, interoperability for obvious reasons. Every agency deploy their systems, right? Then chances are your vehicle might not work in other agencies. Operational consistency. Well, what kind of traffic signal phase you provide? There's no national standard out there, so may want to communicate with each other to achieve some consistency, and that reduce the confusion of the operator. And things like use of confirmation light, little things that would tell you that, hey, you approaching the intersection, you got the preemptions. That is not a universal decision, and a lot of agencies choose not to have it. Who are the user? Well, interesting questions, because most of the projects are funded by fire or the traffic. Well, ambulance, some of those are outsourced services, but police is a different story. Police vehicle are more agile. They approach intersections, so this distance assumptions might not hold for the police, and there are a lot more of them out there, and so peer exchange is needed. Next slide, please. Real quickly, 30 seconds. That you go. If you're an emergency vehicle driver and you go to a intersection that's providing you with preemption, chances are there are different treatment. Up the left-hand side is kind of scary. You thought you got the green and everyone else has to stop, but this is actually allowing the opposing through to go through. But why is it doing that? It's the early day of the traffic signal limitations, and there's still a lot of those out there. But again, these issues without talking to each other create a potential confusion and dangerous scenario for our operators. So next slide, please. As promised, wrapping it up, really good resources. I look back and do my own Google search, and still these two reports are really well documented using charts and diagram and a lot of fundamental information of what is EVP and what are the current offering and whatnot. So I strongly encourage you to look at these documents. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. Interesting.